My name is Tyler Scott. I'm in the one-year program to my master's in business administration, the 11-month program.
And what branch of service were you in?
I was Army, active duty.
Uh, what was your occupation?
I was an infantry officer.
Entry officer. So, where were you born?
I was born in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Did you grow up there?
No, my dad was stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, for I guess the first 3 years of my life, and then moved around every couple of years up until about the age of 8, and then we settled down in Fort Knox, right outside of that area, and was pretty much raised in Brandenburg, Kentucky, right outside of Fort Knox ever since then.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I didn't. How old were you?
I'm 28.
Years old. So, what was your childhood like prior to going to the military?
Uh, Moving around a lot, growing up on military bases for the early years of my life were pretty normal. We were around a lot of military families, so you had friends that you might have had for maybe a year or two at a time, but they came and went until like I said, about the age of 8, when we finally settled down into a permanent living situation. And I got really active in sports, and I met a lot of friends that way. I spent a lot of time fishing and swimming, and playing out in the woods and playing Army and that kind of thing. They had never tried to push anything on me. They're always very open to letting me find my own way. Both my grandfathers were one was Army, one was Air Force. Uncles that were Army Special Forces. Had great grandfather was a 1-star general. It was something that as part of your lineage like that. You can't. They know better than to tell you you can't do it, but they were never pushing it on me either.
Did you know at an early age that you wanted to go to the military?
I'd say yes, I did. It was something I always wanted to do, but I guess there were so many things growing up. There's so many things you want to do, and I guess I never really knew exactly what I wanted to do or why I wanted to do it. I just knew that everything about it was cool. Being out in the woods and being around guys doing cool things like that were fun when you were little, but it wasn't enough to push you to do it. It's hard to really get a good grasp of what it means to give back to your country or anything like that when you're growing up. You don't really fully understand what that means. So I would never say that I really knew that was what I wanted to do. I just knew that it was a very viable option.
So you said that your grandfather was in the military. And your dad was in the military. How did you view them?
Well, Grandpa was, everybody knew about my grandpa. He was in World War II. Served in North Africa for most of his time. He had a couple silver stars, a couple bronze stars, in the fighting there. He married the daughter of his commanding general, who later became was my great grandfather. But he was just very well known, and there were plenty of stories and newspaper writings and everything else written about him in Maryland, just where
What was his
he
name?
was from. He was William Gunther. It backs up to my sophomore year. September 11th was the day that I was ready to go. I was ready to drop out of school that day and ready to enlist, and it really took about 2 weeks straight of phone calls from my grandfather, my dad, any uncles or other family members I had that were in the military that were telling me, don't do it right now. Now's not your time. By the time you get through basic training and everything else, you're going to be a lot better off in any capacity as an officer with what you have to give, as in a leadership position like that. And the same thing happened again when during the ground invasion of Iraq. I was ready to go for that too. And they were telling me, by the time you actually got through training and everything else, you would just be there for the post occupation. And it finally started to resonate, and I realized what they were saying was probably true. But at the same time, I felt a lot of, I don't know, a lot of guilt, I guess, in the way that I knew that a good portion of the people over there in Iraq or Afghanistan were the same age as me, maybe younger, maybe just a little bit older, but they were pulling their weight. They were doing their part. And every day that I continue to go to class and see the way people talked about it, people acted when those kind of things came up, just some of it just made me sick, just to think that that a lot of them just never even give a second thought to the idea of putting their own lives on the line for something like that, And I knew, it was something that was in my blood. It was something that I knew that my family members had done before me, and it was my time. I'd been given everything up to that point, and it was time for me to give back. It was one of those moments where you could feel that calling. I know it's one of those kind of hokey things that are thrown around, but it really was. It was. I could feel the calling, and it was up to me whether or not I was going to answer it or not. Whether or not I was actually going to put on the boots and go do the job that everybody else in my family had done before me, that millions and millions of Americans had done before me, and to keep everyone able to live the way that they're living now and in the future. So, and that was really hard for a lot of my friends to understand. That was really hard for my girlfriend at the time to comprehend. That relationship didn't last long after leaving for basic training. But I was told by some of my best friends growing up. I was told that a lot of them were the ones that they don't support the war, they didn't support the intervention or anything else when it came to direct conflict. And I remember one of my best friends telling me, "Well, I guess I'll see you at your funeral next. That'll be the next time I see you." It's like, wow, thanks for the support, appreciate it. But I wasn't asking everybody to understand. I wasn't asking everybody to support the war. I was just asking people to support the guys and girls that are over there trying to do the best they can. And pretty soon that was going to be me over there too. So
what was it like? I mean, Georgetown's a liberal arts college. How were you viewed and judged once you had made your mind up your sophomore year when the towers in New York were hit by planes?
The professors themselves were pretty liberal-minded, but most of the student body was from conservative families in Kentucky. It wasn't uncommon for people to have that same that united feeling of let's do something. But it seemed like for most of the people around me, it wore off pretty quickly. Once it seemed like the government had this thing under control over in Afghanistan, people lost interest pretty quick. You know what I mean? It's
what kept you driven?
Like I said, part of it was that guilt that I knew that other people were pulling my weight. Part of it was just knowing that I was a capable male of an American citizen who was capable of doing a lot of different things, in some branch of the military. of making some kind of positive contribution, but I wasn't doing it. You know, I was I'm not saying there's anything wrong with sitting and going to class and educating yourself, but there was no way I could go from being a student to getting a job and feeling like I was going to work every day in something that just didn't matter. And just sit there and rely on everybody else to pull my weight.
When you enlisted, or when you were commissioned,
I enlisted first.
you enlisted
Mhm.
first.
Yeah.
Did you enlist with the intention to go to Iraq or Afghanistan?
Every recruiter at that point was pretty upfront about it. There was no point beating around the bush. So there's about a 90% chance that once you got out of training, whatever unit you were going to was heading out. Within 8 to 12 months of your arrival. So that was my overall intent was to go there and try to make a difference.
Well, being just a college graduate and not a soldier at that point, how did that make you feel?
I knew I had a lot to learn. It was a sharp learning curve that I had to overcome because I knew once it was in my contract that once I graduated basic training, I was going to go to officer candidate school, and I was going to become a second lieutenant, and I was going to take over a platoon of very well experienced guys. Some of them already on their third or fourth tour, and they knew a whole lot, and yet I was still the one in charge of them. So I knew I had a lot to learn, had a lot of reading to do. There wasn't time for spare time, basically.
How did that feel coming to a unit and being in charge of some seasoned veterans?
It was very overwhelming. I mean, I'd done everything I had to do up to that point, but everything I'd done up to that point was schooling. I mean, and that's common for low grade officers across the board. I spent, I'm trying to think how long it was, about 14, 15 months in training, from basic to officer basic, to officer candidate school, to officer basic courses, to ranger school, and then airborne school, and then the first day at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. They're saying, hey, get ready, you're getting ready to take over an airborne infantry platoon, and that's pretty tough. Oh, by the way, you're going to go meet them out in the field. They've been out there on the field problem for the last week and a half. So I wanted to join because I wanted to be on the front lines. I wanted to be on the ground, kicking in doors with my men that I knew I could only do as a platoon leader, in a line company. The idea of being a desk jockey just never appealed to me, and I knew the higher I got promoted, the farther away I was getting from doing what I joined to do, which is one of the main reasons I ultimately decided to get out. The Defense Ready Force for basically all the military in the U.S. at the time. It was around Christmas of '06. It meant we were basically on 2-hour recall, and we had heard rumors about the surge that may be coming up, but nothing official was ever going to be sent out, and it wasn't. All we knew was that basically Christmas was canceled. You're not going anywhere, but you might want to start packing your bags. But we're not going to tell you officially you should be packing your bags. And so we were training on Christmas Eve. We were training a little bit on Christmas Day. We had a jump the day after Christmas. That's just not normal procedure for any branch of the military. But still, they wouldn't tell us you're getting ready to leave. It wasn't until maybe the 27th of December that they said, all right, your orders are finally coming down. you're leaving in 5 days. We got on C-130s, did the death spiral into Baghdad International Airport, landed, and started getting on Chinooks right away, going out to a little fob right outside of Sadr City, a fob loyalty, and we didn't really get a lot of time to learn the area or anything. We got our equipment, we got our Humvees, and we got some more of the in-theater equipment, and we started operating not too long after that. The first time I guess something really went wrong that it was outside of a planned direct operation or anything, where we were actually going into to hit a target or anything like that, was we'd been living out at an Iraqi police station. It was a joint security station where we took over this this little, basically was their old locker room, basically, that we cleaned out and put some bunks in, and we were living out there 4 or 5 days at a time. Just the whole idea was to create better coordination between ourselves, the Iraqi police, the Iraqi army, and the Iraqi National Guard that were all all security forces in the area. And it was also a way to keep us from driving off the roads, because our sector was a pretty good distance from the base that we were operating out of. So we're trying to take out that driving time, because one of the biggest threats were the IEDs and the ambushes on the roads. So being light infantry anyway, we hated our vehicles more than anything. We liked being on foot, and we liked it allowed us to be to more add the element of surprise into what we were doing, and things that you just can't do with a 13,000-pound Humvee. And so we were coming back one day from that joint security station. We were headed back to the fob to refit for a day, do some laundry and everything. And I guess it was just after my vehicle, my Humvee had passed this turn we had made. I heard the explosion behind me, and it was huge. It shook everything. My first thought was, man, who was it? Who did it hit? Because I knew the type of explosion, because I'd seen plenty of other units getting hit, and we'd helped out a lot of ways. And this was really early on still. This was maybe less than a month into our deployment anyway. And we'd seen a lot of other things go wrong, but this is the first time it really happened to us. And I was getting it up from everybody, all the other vehicles in my convoy, and everybody was good. So we're trying to figure out what in the world it was. Well, a platoon from one of the other companies had just left the fob and was passing us on the road, and their lead vehicle had actually been the one to trigger the IED, and had basically blown a hole completely through the engine block. My entire convoy had passed in front of this IED, one of the EFPs, the really deadly ones, the ones that, like I said, punched a hole through an entire engine block about this big around. And so we wheeled back around as fast as we could, and pushed out security so we could pull the guys out of their truck. Luckily, the only injury was the driver. Part of his lower left leg was pretty mangled, pretty messed up, but he got lucky. Just the way the guys who'd set that IED they just set the trigger wrong. They using a passive infrared sensor that's set off by the heat from the engine block, and they just angled the explosion in the wrong direction. So it hit the engine block instead of hitting the door. and the guy still had to get medevaced out of there. He had to get flown out, and part of his leg was removed, but he's still alive because of that mistake. But then we spent the next, I don't know, maybe the next 4 or 5 hours. When I took my platoon, we just went door to door around every house within the vicinity, just kicked in every door we could, and we weren't throwing people out on the street. We weren't throwing sandbags on their head or anything like that. But it's one of those situations in the middle of the day where people are afraid to talk, and they're, rightfully so. But they knew more than they were letting on, and it took a lot of different interrogations and everything else, and house searches and everything else to finally get some information. But it wasn't much, and that was really tough to realize that there was going to be those times when there was going to be no good result. We weren't going to get any kind of revenge, or we weren't going to always catch the bad guy. We needed an extra gun. We couldn't afford to have me or my RTO or anybody else not pulling the trigger. But the hardest thing is would be to keep from just freezing up, to keeping from just finding cover and waiting for it to stop. You've got to, because if you do that, then you can easily be overwhelmed, you can easily be surrounded. Guys start getting hurt, and one guy gets hurt, and basically 3 guys are taken out of the fight. It's gonna take another 2 to get them out of direct contact. So, these are the things that were constantly running through my mind. It was the first shot was fired. That was get the biggest gun we had pointed in the right direction, and everybody else be ready to move, and make sure you make the right moves, the right calls. That might have been one of my biggest mistakes, was that I didn't always take the time to figure out how to deal with it. I did a lot of other things to, I guess, probably to not confront it. I spent more time focusing on what happened and what went wrong, in that particular mission, than figuring out how it affected me in the long run. It's probably more of a defense mechanism than anything, to keep from showing any signs of weakness like that in front of your guys. It's something that's always kept at the front of your mind. But I guess a lot of it I didn't really deal with very well until I got home and really had time to think about those kind of things. And it's been a long process. Just being back in civilian life altogether was really different. I was used to living in an army town, being around soldiers all the time, being around, I don't know, it's just, this macho, manly atmosphere. Fort Bragg was all paratroopers and special forces guys, and so everything we did was designed around competition, and who can run the farthest, who can ruck the farthest, who can shoot the best, all those kinds of things. And getting back in a world where none of that really matters, back in the school environment, was pretty different. And then getting into school atmosphere anyways, a lot of people that are younger, people who are fresh out of undergrad, mostly don't have any kind of real world experience. Some do. There's several that were older than me that have worked in the real world for a while. But I was I had a little bit of trouble at first trying to find ways to connect with guys who really hadn't done much outside of school. For my age, I'm the only person that has my experience in my class, that type of experience, and really I don't think there's anybody that's even has anything close to that I could talk to about on that kind of level. It doesn't exist at all. So there's a lot of times you feel alone in that area. People are talking about what bars they're going to and what part of schools their favorite thing, and they're complaining about this upcoming test, whatever. It's hard to explain my perspective compared to theirs, because I don't see the things that they see as a big deal, but it's a matter of your own experience. It's a matter of what you know, and so it's hard to explain to people why that is. The coping with things that happened on deployment really began, I guess, once I left Fort Bragg and came back here. And so going through the idea that my old unit, my friends, guys that I'd served with, they're getting ready to go back. They're getting ready to go on another tour, and I wasn't with them anymore. There was feeling of guilt, like I'd abandoned them. We spent so long in Baghdad that I really I knew a lot of the people there. I had relationships with a lot of the locals, and I guess I felt a lot of the guilt for the pain and suffering that they were still going through, that we hadn't fixed yet. We hadn't changed everything, and I knew we wouldn't. I knew the war wouldn't give me one while we were there. I wasn't there when I started, or I wasn't there when it started, and most likely I wasn't going to be there when it was over. But just this idea that we maybe not directly caused all the pain and suffering for all the people there, but we were responsible for a good portion of it. We definitely didn't make things better for a long, long time. And I guess I feel responsible for a lot of that, just by being there. And that's always been on my mind, and that's dealing with all those kinds of things at the same time of just trying to do a typical homework problem, or working on a group project while you have those things rolling through your head while everybody else is trying to talk about what we need to do to fix this accounting problem. It's tough. I don't want to be viewed as different, I think that's one of the hardest things, is when you choose to do something so different with your life, and you come back, and I don't want to forget it all or pretend like it didn't happen, but I don't want to be treated differently. I'm a pretty modest person. I don't really like toot my own horn, but it's one thing to say you're going to do it, and it's another thing to actually do it, and I did it. I answered the call. I accomplished everything I set out to do. I said I wanted to lead men in combat. I wanted to be on the ground in a position to make the biggest impact I could, and I couldn't have asked for a better experience or better place to do that, as you know, the lead battalion back into Baghdad during the surge. You know, that was nothing I could have ever planned, but all things considered, my goals were accomplished.